Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Dave Whitehead, CEO at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and my guest today is Rob Lee. Rob is the CEO and co-founder of Dragos, an industrial control system cybersecurity company that provides customers, including the U.S. government, with leading-edge cybersecurity technology. Rob began his career in cybersecurity in the U.S. Air Force as a cyber warfare operations officer, and he spent most of his career at the National Security Agency, where he built and led a first-of-a-kind mission hunting and analyzing state actors targeting ICS, which is Industrial Control Systems. He's also a senior instructor at the SANS Institute, a leading provider of information and cybersecurity training and certifications. And I've been really looking forward to this episode because industrial control system security is a key area of interest for me, and Rob is one of the leading experts in the field. Hi, Rob, and welcome to our podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. So, one of the fun things is, how in the heck did you ever get involved in cybersecurity? Out of all the things you could have got involved with, why cybersecurity?
Yeah. I'm from Alabama, and I grew up with two military parents, and they were both senior master sergeants in the Air Force. And so going into the Air Force was always kind of a given. What I was going to do wasn't a given. I got to the Air Force Academy as a young freshman, and they said, hey, want to go into computer science and or you want to go and do something else? I said, computer science sounds good. And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. So you could stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning at the Air Force Academy, finishing your homework and then starting again at 6 a.m. Or you're going to recognize you're going to stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning anyway. You could be up playing video games as a political science major. And I was like, that sounds great. So I actually started in political science, and that got me into African studies and working on the African continent and spending summers in places like Cameroon using control systems to build wind turbines and water filtration units and really do the humanitarian side of what control systems really can mean to the world. I kind of fell backwards into cybersecurity when I graduated, and they kicked me out and said, do you want to be a pilot? And I said, both my parents are enlisted, so the answer is no. I don't want to hang around with pilots. And so they would say, well, screw you then, go do this new comm thing that's turning into the cyber thing. And when I got into the cyber schoolhouse, I recognized that folks really didn't have any understanding of what control systems were. I said, hey, here's all these control system things. What are you doing about them? Like, oh, no, here's how we hack into networks and IT stuff and whatever. And I'm like, that's fine, but what are you doing about industrial control systems? Like, what are control systems? Like, man, it's everything from your aircraft carriers to your jets to, literally satellites, everything. So I spent most of the time in the schoolhouse advocating around what that was. By the time they kicked me to graduation and moving out to be working in Germany, doing counterterrorism operations and things like that, the NSA picked me up pretty quickly, and I spent my time there. They said, go find the unknown unknowns. I said, what is that? And they had, no, I don't know. Go do it. And I'm like, okay. So with accesses afforded by the United States government, I said, well, the cool kids on the block, the cool threats out there, maybe they'd be targeting industrial control systems. And so I ended up building out that mission. That's really how I got into all this. And what we found was far more threats in far different ways targeting industrial control system environments than I think most people realize. And that just kind of led to here.
So following up on that for just a second, so it seems like you were kind of the leader of the industrial control systems as a target community. And did that really come then from your experience being overseas and putting together industrial control systems and then kind of putting two and two together that, man, we need to look out for these systems. They're certainly different than our IT systems, but perhaps nobody was taking a look at them as a threat vector?
Absolutely. So I think, the community writ large, and however we want to define that term, has thought about industrial control system security for a long, long time, as you know. Schweitzer's been involved in a lot of that. And if you think back to 1998, Presidential Directive 63 was talking about critical infrastructure protection and sector-specific agencies and all of this. So it wasn't a new topic. And the NSA also had a whole division around people looking at control systems to find vulnerabilities, to patch them, similar. But nobody had set up a mission looking at, well, who's already hacking into these things. And so it was more of a go hunting for threats and go do instant response investigations and intel. And as an intel analyst, one of the things you learn, just to your core, is that if you don't have good collection, you can't produce anything. You can be the best analyst in the world, but if you're not collecting where the threats are, if you're not collecting good data and insights, how could you turn it into anything good? And for me, when I realized that we weren't even looking at industrial control systems from that angle, it was obvious that if we put out, almost like you're going fishing, put out some lures in that way, if we went hunting for threats by adapting our collection to start seeing who is targeting industrial control systems, then surely we're going to find new collection that would afford us new analysis. And so, that was really the mindset is if you want me to find the unknown unknowns, you want me to find the new states doing this, well, give me a new set of collection. Let me go after something new. And if nobody's touching ICS, heck yeah. And I think it was personal too. When you think about China breaking into the Office of Personnel Management and stealing my clearances, information, everything else with everybody else, there's nothing really personal about that. That's we can sit all here today and argue about it, but that's what intelligence agencies do. And I'm totally cool with China coming after military members in that way and back and forth, and NSA breaking into a telecom server overseas to look for terrorist activity. That's fine. But targeting control systems, that just felt dirty. When my experience with them, I'm not an engineer by trade by any chance. I just worked with control systems and seeing what it could do for local communities and seeing what they could do for power and water and safe environments, to have somebody develop capabilities and targeting of those systems just felt like pure evil.
So you spend a handful of years working for the Air Force and NSA, and then at some point you decide to start your own company, and your mission statement is safeguarding civilization. That's one of the reasons you started the company. But what was your big objective of safeguarding civilization, and what do you mean by it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that go into it. First and foremost, I want my son to have lights and water when he grows up and manufacture goods and a safer world. And there are states getting more and more aggressive and getting better at it. I think there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of fear and crap in this environment. We need to dive it down sometimes, but there's still actually a lot of actors out there explicitly trying to hurt people. I mean, there was a sanctions a couple weeks ago from the U.S. government, a threat that we worked and tracked that explicitly tried to kill people by targeting safety equipment in a petrochemical facility. That stuff's dangerous. So when we think about safeguarding civilization, first and foremost, it's that. How do we make the world a safer place by enabling some of the best customers in the world? There's folks that are providing utilities and infrastructure to their local community. There's something endearing, especially when you get into like the electric power community. They're all important. When you get in the electric power community, though, and it's, hey, we work and deliver services in the community that we live and serve in. There's this sort of community aspect to it all, and it's very empowering. So that's probably first thing. The second thing that comes to mind is we're a venture-backed company, and I don't think venture capital into software companies always delivers this feel-good mission. I'm not trying to put anybody down, but no one would be mistaken to look at some, Silicon Valley-backed kind of tech firm and go, oh, okay, they're trying to get acquired, they're trying to pop up and do this, and all that. And
you guys aren't TikTok, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, touche. And so nobody would be mistaken for thinking that and going, oh, so what does this mean? Safeguarding civilization, VC backed. And to me, the way that we recruited our investors and the way that we talked about kind of building the company, one, we don't want to get acquired. We want to build a long-standing company to partner with these infrastructure owners and operators. And number two, you can't just sell, and no offense to them, I love them to death, I'm going to name some customers out there. You can't just sell to the Southern companies and the national grids of the world. They're amazing. They're super important. But how do you protect Coleman Cooperative electric power? How do you protect, Trinity River Authority in Texas? How do you protect the small players in an affordable and scalable way? And so I think our job is not only to build a successful company, sure, that's nice, but it's to do it in a way that is accessible to everybody and helps build the community at the same time, so that at the end we are really all better for it.
Well, in full disclosure too, SEL has invested in Dragos just exactly for the reasons you mentioned, right? It's while everybody companies need to make a profit so they can keep the business going, right? It's really about the mission and what you're trying to accomplish, and what you guys have done is some really cool stuff. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So here's a fun thing. You guys have been involved in some pretty big cyber event analysis. We can talk about the Ukraine and stuff like that. And those are interesting events, and some of them were significant, dropping that one in 2015 where they dropped 25 or 250,000 customers in the Ukraine off on, essentially during the Christmas holiday. And that's interesting. But what about Trisis? And could you explain what Trisis is and why it is so significant?
Yeah, no, this is great. I'm going to walk through Ukraine to get there because you set it up nicely and it's an important context. So I got to lead up the investigation on the 2015 Ukraine attack with Mike Asante and a couple others, explicitly looking at the first ever cyber attack to take down electric power. And you're right, 250,000 customers without power. It doesn't sound terrible actually at first. I mean, it's a bad event, but 250,000 customers, 3 regions of Ukraine, distribution grid. Okay, 6 hours of outage. Okay, it doesn't strike you at first. In reality, they lost their operations for like 9 months. So the power came back on, but they were without SCADA and any sort of supervisory control and insight for over 9 months. But that attack was 23 people on keyboard. That the forensics of it show that there's about 23 people involved in actually attacking that environment. When you get to 2016 Ukraine, you saw them codify the knowledge of those 23 or so folks into software. And that's the malicious software crash override, the one that our firm analyzed and reported out on. So you had this move from highly manual, highly intensive resourcing into more scalable attacks. And it wasn't about the same kind of stuff that you'd expect to do on your enterprise environment. It was about learning native control system protocols and communications on the network, dealing with IEC 104 instead of thinking about exploits and vulnerabilities. Move forward then to 2000.
Yeah, let me just stop you right there. And if we're going to talk about the Ukraine, because I think you mentioned some interesting points, and you're the expert, and I'm just a rookie talking to the expert. But if I look at 2015, what I look at that is, well, as unfortunate it was the root cause, you might say, is just some poor network designs, and allowing folks to VPN into the control systems. So stuff you could, if you're really locking down IT and OT networks and stuff like that attack probably could have been avoided. But you fast forward then to 2016, and to me that was let me use the phrase, oh shit, right? Because they delivered basically a vehicle to deliver their exploit that they wanted to take advantage of a particular protocol. And to me that was, it was the 15 to 16 was just light years different in the attack that happened.
Oh, you're spot on, and that's exactly what Mike and I had when we looked at the 2016 one. Because in 2015, it was more of a holy crap, somebody did it.
Yeah.
But that they could and how they did it wasn't surprising. And I think there is a lot of over focus on prevention in these environments where they're like, oh, we're going to lock this down. And if you did it perfectly and right and whatever else, I think it would be pretty solid. But the reality is, connectivity finds a way, life finds a way, kind of thing. And without any visibility, without any monitoring, without making sure things are actually the way that we thought they were, it's not surprising that 2015 happened. To your point, the fact that they codified that knowledge in a scalable format is what terrified me. It wasn't that they went after a transmission level substation in 2016. Now, like, okay, that's interesting. It was that they did so in a way that could be repeated on any other transmission substation in the world that was using IEC 104, and to move it to DMP3 would take like a day.
Yeah,
of work.
Exactly.
And so that's what was terrifying, and even more so. What was really bothering me about the attack is the outage that they experienced was not the actual intent of the attack. Sure, they expected that to happen, but they were expecting the operators to do what they did in 2015 and go back to manual operations. And they explicitly tried to deny the safety or the protective functionality in the digital relay. It wasn't a Schweitzer one, by the way, but in the digital relay. And what they were essentially doing was leaving the networking and comms up so it looked green, lights across the board, everything looks fine, but remove the protective functionality so that when the operators would have reconnected the equipment, it would have been reconnected under load without any understanding of that taking place, which could have reasonably led to physical damage at the transmission site. So there was a lot of things that could have happened. Luckily, some components of the attack failed, and it was just an electric power outage instead of electric power outage and damage. But to your point, yeah, it's scalable, it's repeatable, and it's a blueprint for it. Too often in cybersecurity, people want to pass out technical indicators of here's an IP address to look for, or here's an email to look for, or whatever. And in reality, these things are blueprints. They're tradecraft, or basically the how these things are accomplished. And we as a community got to get better looking not for the individual technical elements, but what's the larger picture of the how unfolding, and get ahead of it. But yeah, anyway, so that's perfectly done in 2017. And why I say that is they're different adversaries, but the thing that happened was very, very similar, where the adversary broke into a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia.
You're moving
back
on
in
to
2014.
Trisis now, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yep, going to Trisis. So in 2014, a different adversary broke into a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia. They bypassed the security controls they had in place for the enterprise, beelined for the industrial operations environment, specifically the distributed control system environment and the safety system and networks. And it wasn't like a bunch of mistakes from the defenders. It wasn't like they weren't doing security. It's just, again, no one was monitoring. No one's looking for these things. And a lot of native functionality and connections get abused. And what happened is the adversaries identified the safety instrumented system at that environment, the SIS, and they figured out what it was, and they left. And over the next 3 years, they would have had to go out and physically acquire the gear, reverse engineered the hardware, the firmware, et cetera. And they developed a specific capability, which we called Trisis, that they came back in 2017 and deployed it against the safety system. And the intent of their attack was to remove the safety logic from the safety system in such a way that they could then carry out an attack on the DCS, which there was indications of the network that's exactly what they're trying to do, in a way that would have killed people at that facility. And what happened is they made a small coding error on their own malicious software, and it caused the safety system to trip and bring down operations like it's designed to do. It wasn't resiliency of the safety system, though. It was a mistake on the adversary's hand. And when the operations folks got involved, they went through their normal root cause analysis procedures, normal investigations, but they never thought about cyber. So they called the vendor, involved the OEM, everything else involved, had the IT people come look at the networks just in case. Everything looked fine. So they started trying to get back into production and get up and running again, which gave the adversary a second chance. And the adversary, updated their malicious software, but actually fixed a different error, not the right error. This time deployed it against 6 environments in that facility, made the same mistake, dropped all the environments again. We're talking tens of millions of dollars in damage in terms of operations value. But this time it was obvious to the operations folks that something was wrong. They called in Saudi Aramco, who was not the victim. They were actually kind of like your good neighbors. And some folks from the incident response team at Saudi Aramco who were ICS trained, ICS security trained, came and looked at it and was like, holy crap. And then my firm and another got involved and analyzed it out and kind of pieced together the story. I mean, it's absolutely stunning, not only the level of time and effort the adversary took to really learn the industrial operations, not just malicious software and cyber stuff, but understanding kind of the engineering of it. But really just brazen that they were literally trying to kill people in that facility.
How long did it take you guys to figure out what was going on?
So you knew it was kind of bad on day one, but I want to say, it took our folks, if I remember correctly, I want to say probably 72 hours to piece together enough of the story to be coherent and have, really good recommendations and things like that. And then it was another couple months to really answer every question you would have. And the reason for that is a lot of the ICS environments, especially when you're getting outside, when we get into broader process control industries as an example, a lot of the equipment, it isn't necessarily old or legacy. I think that's largely a kind of a little bit of a myth of our community that everything's just legacy. That's not true. But you run into a lot of undocumented things, or maybe the OEM purchased another company and now they have that product line, but they don't necessarily know exactly how it works as well. So that the problem for us wasn't in reverse engineering the malicious software and piecing together the artifacts of the attack. What took the long time is in this attack, the safety system was a Schneider Triconics system. Could have been any safety system. It happened to be what the victim had. But we had to literally go acquire and buy and reverse engineer the Triconics, operating system and everything else just to even begin to do the malicious software analysis. So that can be a real time sink. You generally think about instant response, and you want instant response to be done quickly. And what I don't think most people in industrial communities understand is the nature of our environments means you better have a plan and exercise it ahead of time. Because the day you getting punched in the face is a really bad day to start thinking about your instant response plan.
Yeah. What is it that Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan right up until you get punched in the face.
Yep.
Hey,
Yep.
What do you tell a customer? Because you just said, well, within 72 hours we knew there was a problem, but it takes 3 months to get to answering all the questions. What do you say? Well, keep your safety system in place, and we hope nothing bad happens. Or how do you respond to that one?
For the operations critical components, it's within a 72-hour window, and that's kind of how you have to govern what we look at. Obviously, you want it to be faster, and depending on the complexity of the attack, it could be a mere couple of hours. But from as complex as this was and trying to target human life, my recommendation definitely wasn't to spin back up operations until we could really get an understanding of what was going on. But to answer every question is what takes months, and that can get into like, hey, do you think they had help? Do you think there was? Do you think there's a functionality here that can scale to other industries? It's kind of like all of the after action kind of reportables, and what does this one attack mean to the broader industry? That's what can take a long time. Depending on the complexity of the attack.
So maybe it's first you stabilize the patient so they don't die.
Exactly.
Right, and then you work through the physical therapy and all the rest to getting back to a healthy state.
Absolutely, and I do think that's a good kind of way to think about it for a lot of these environments is, we had an event, we want to get to our mean time to recovery, we want to get back up and running. But when you're dealing with thoughtful human adversaries, it's not necessarily that you're going to get punched in the face once and then they're going to be like, okay, I want to stop now and wait for you to be okay. Like it can be an ongoing thing, and we work cases where the adversary is very persistent in trying to get back into the environments after you kick them out. And if you think about the current status of your environment, it is the last known status of getting compromised. So you got to do something different after the compromise if you're going to be in a better place.
So you guys go through the crisis, and I'm sure you guys are trying to figure out, well, what happened. There's also the idea of who's doing this. And I've heard you say that Dragos won't attribute an attack to an organization or a nation state or whatever. Why is that?
Yeah. So I worked attribution cases as well as at the NSA, and I'm very familiar with how it's done. And it's not meant to be arrogant, but to give more credibility to my statements about follow. Most consumers of intelligence ask who did it. It's a very natural human thing to want to know who tried to hurt you. Most consumers of intelligence have no need to know. There's no value in what they're trying to accomplish. And so I think it's in the interest of the consumer to have an intelligence professional that's honest with them of saying, I can determine that. We can go down that path. It's going to be exponentially more expensive to get that kind of answer. I don't mean like a vendor relationship. I just mean time and effort and sources. And you can get lucky and it take months. You can get not so lucky and take years to really get good attribution. And you have to be honest with yourself of, do you really need this? And is it worth all the expense we're about to go down? And so number one, most customers of intelligence and insights want to know how to protect their systems in the future, not who did it. And we do track threats. And so we will track the entities and we'll say, hey, this is, a crisis case. This is xenotime. We'll just assign some mineral, industrial mineral. It doesn't really matter who did it. We just say these are cases related to xenotime. And that matters for us because we saw the people that deployed the malware crisis. We saw them target electric companies in the United States. We saw them target electric companies in Australia and New Zealand. We saw them target oil and gas companies across the Gulf Coast cooperation countries. It matters to know that the people that did this also are targeting over here, here, and here, and that can help you be proactive. But whether it's China, Russia, Iran, Algeria, Brazil, whatever, that doesn't really help you in defending your systems. Now, it can matter at a state level when you're doing sanctions and things like that, which we've seen used very well. But the other thing, so number two, the other thing I think about a lot is the fact that Dragos is one of a very few number of firms who has not only the technology that we have, but specifically is doing intel and incident response. We get called into a wide variety of the cases around the world. There are not so many that get into the media. There's way more that's actually happening. We try very hard to keep it out of the media. And I know by being one of the few firms that has the White House and the Australian government and the Norwegian government and others actually listening to us, and senators that listen to us, if we were to come out and go, it's Russia, that has significant geopolitical impacts. And it may not be in the best interest of our customers. So instead, what we do is when the government asks us to cooperate, and this isn't just the US government, but any kind of like-minded government asks us to cooperate with them in a way that does not identify the victims, because we won't do that either. We've had some interesting stories there too, but in a way that doesn't identify the victim. If they say, look, we just want to know what you know about this threat without getting into customer data sets, whatever, we're happy to share that. And if they want to go do attribution, I think that's entirely in their court. And I think the United States government, Australian government, UK government, et cetera, should come out and do attribution on these things. But I don't think they should wait for the private sector to do it and then go, oh, yeah, Dragos said, no, you go do your own attribution. That's what you're geared up for.
So I'm reading this book called The Perfect Weapon, War, Sabotage, and the Fears in the Cyber Age by David Sanger. And Dragos was mentioned in that, by the way. I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at it, but it talks
I told you I'm from Alabama. That means I don't read. No,
I didn't say that out loud. But it'd be a great book for somebody that hasn't, that doesn't follow cyber security challenges every day, because he brings up some of the unique, complex dynamics of cyber as a weapon. So I've got a few questions I'd like to, after reading the book, I thought, these would be fun to talk to Rob about. So here's the first one. You sort of touched on it, is what do you think the roles of the government and industry are to protect critical infrastructure, especially since in the U.S., unlike many other countries, the critical infrastructure is owned by private industry and not the government?
Yeah, I'm extremely opinionated on this one, so I apologize to all the government people that have to hear me ramble here for a second. But I'm a huge fan of the U.S. government, by and large. And I'm a huge fan because I've interacted with them on the inside and on the outside to see the passion and dedication and the true desire to do good. Even when you think about, the United States breaks into other countries and Russia breaks into other countries, we're the same. No. The United States shows an unbelievable amount of restraint in the way that it conducts itself internationally. It's not always good. We don't always do everything perfectly. But in terms of what capability they have versus what they can do offensively and intelligence-wise, an enormous amount of restraint. On the topic of defense, though, and defense in the private sector, the United States government isn't in the lead. The United States government can break in any facility in the world they want to. They're good at it. Intelligence capabilities, they're great at it. Doing attribution, they can run circles around private sector firms. If my firm comes out and says, it's Russia, which we wouldn't do anyways, and the United States comes out and goes, nah, it's Iran, you should believe the United States government. They're really good at attribution. But on the topic of how to defend and what do these attacks look like, that's in the private sector. My firm, and I don't mean this to be arrogant, but I have more access and more insights and more expertise on ICS threats and cases today at Dragos than my entire time at the NSA. Why? It's obvious. The NSA doesn't get called into incident response cases. Dragos does. So obviously we're going to see the full chain of the attack. We're going to see all of the insights. We're going to learn from it. We're going to pattern it out. We're going to produce insights. We're going to codify it into technology. We're going to be good at defense. But there's different requirements and roles and responsibilities. And so the government should play to its strengths. Hey, when we were doing intelligence operations, here's some things we learned. Or, hey, based on all the things we see, let's amplify the things that we think are most important. Hey, private sector, there's so many things you can do in terms of security. let's come give you a board level presentation at your company about why the United States government feels these threats are real and serious, and the things that we're actually tracking in terms of helping you prioritize what you do with limited budgets and resources. What the government shouldn't be doing is trying to recreate services and software and technology that already exists in the private sector, using taxpayer money to compete with tax-paying entities, because the government can't do that mission. It's shown that it can't do that mission, and it can't scale to do it for everybody, but the private sector can. So by playing to our strengths, we're in a really good position. I hate when I see a government official in front of an audience go, yeah, I can tell you that's classified. That's crap. I had all the clearances in the world. I ran that mission. There's no magic secret sauce behind the curtain. The best intel on how the attacks happened are in the private sector. You're right. We can tell you who on the Russian team it is. We can tell you exactly what office the GRU. Sure, that's not going to help you. And so it's just about different roles and responsibilities. And I'll make one more comment about that before I stop. But I don't even know the roles and responsibilities in the government is clearly defined, let alone government to the private sector. One of the common questions I get from board of directors members at power companies especially is, who do we call? DHS is in here and said call them. DOE was in here and said call them. FBI was in here and said call them. And National Guard wants to be involved. Who do we call? And my honest advice is, you call your outside counsel. You put it under client attorney privilege. You involve an incident response firm like mine or whoever you'd like. You call the thing an event. You figure out every bit of detail you can to protect your company and do the things you need to. And the moment that you've actually got a good picture and understanding, then you call it an incident. And within an hour, you're notifying everybody in writing. And until then, get your feet underneath you, because government coming in trying to pretend that they can run your power sector better, or you know how to do this better than you or something, it's not going to be beneficial to anybody. And I think we got to play to our strengths a lot better than we are currently.
Yeah, I think you and I are really aligned on that. I think that the government's role is to teach all of us, whether we're manufacturers of solutions or the asset owners, what's going out on the world and what we should be concerned about. And then it's up to us to figure out, based on what we learned and we know our systems, what's the best way to go about protecting those things. And I think then you get, creativity and innovation and everything else that goes along with protecting our systems. So you brought up, it does you no good. At the end of the day, there's not a lot of benefit. Let me say it that way. There's not a lot of benefit to knowing who is exactly attacking you. But the third grader in me, wants to know who is poking at me or punching me in the face, because I want to do something about it, right? And so what should the response to a cyber attack on a company or an industry like the electric sector or a nation be, right? That offensive thing. Should I just always be the sucker and getting punched in the face, or should I strike back? And what do you think that the bound should be on something like that? Because that could get out of hand real quick.
It's extremely escalatory. Yeah, and from an international relations perspective, it gets escalatory very, very quickly. Just because one team inside of Russia or China or Iran, whatever, decided to attack you or do something doesn't mean that it was authorized or well known across that organization, which means they're going to see the strike back and think that you were the perpetrator, and then it's going to get out of hand real quick. I'm not thinking it doesn't have a role, though. So from my point of view, first and foremost, there's been a desire for cyber deterrence for as long as I've been in this field, and it doesn't work. But even if it did, the best cyber deterrent, if I can raise the cost on you as an attacker to do your job, and I can make it more risky, and by the fact that you may not know if you're going to have a successful mission after a long expenditure of resources, then you're going to be more deterred to not do that operation. Defense is the best place to play here. That being said, I do think there's a place for offense. I do think there's a place for a wide variety of things. I just think we should use a whole of government approach. So what tends to happen is we'll see the Department of Justice go out and do a name and shame game. And they'll show, Chinese military officers and Wild Wild West posters and be like, they did this, and here's these Iranians, they hacked a dam. And I don't want to be dismissive of the DOJ. I think there may be a role for that, but I want to be real careful, because you're throwing up pictures of people in military uniforms and saying they hacked you. I can think of a bunch of my ex-NSA guys sitting around in military uniforms, and the last thing I want to see is them up on Wild Wild West posters in Beijing. So I don't know that it's fair to say that they're similar, but we got to be real careful with how we message internationally around that. So when we look at a whole of government response, what does that really mean? In my opinion, There's a role for the DOJ, the Department of Justice, doing sort of, holding people accountable, but I don't want to misplace the focus on the people. The real perpetrator is the government, not the operator that got tasked to do it down inside of a specific intelligence unit. In addition, there's Treasury, the new sanctions. There's diplomatic efforts. There's kicking people out of things like the G20. There's all of these different economic and diplomatic and international relations we have, and we should leverage those. And it should be a slow, spiraling kind of staircase up of, first we're going to warn you, then we're going to come out, the president's going to say something, then we're going to sanction you, then we're going to, name and shame. And you sort of ratchet it up because you don't want to do anything too quick because it's very escalatory. And the nature of what the private sector wants is different. If you have any attack against your infrastructure, you want the military out there swinging. In reality, if you didn't have a significant loss of life or an impact on the economy, it's not really a state level action the government wants to be involved in. They'll talk to you nicely about it, but there's bad things that happen all the time, and a lot of things in cyber don't rise to that level. And so I guess my point is, when there's a whole of government response, there can be a strategy that also has Cyber Command going back in and doing the defend forward mission of compromising our adversary's infrastructure. There can be, at the very high end, a well-placed predator, drone strike, very, 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 very high end now, particularly after like loss of life scenarios. You can have those things, but you can't start there. And you got to be apparent and transparent with what it takes to get there. Right now, our adversaries do not know what the red lines are, and they don't know what they're going to be met with. That's not a strategy of deterrence. That's a strategy of ambiguity, and that's hard for anybody to deal with.
So here's where I struggle a little bit, right? So we have economic sanctions and things like that you could probably do with certainly big nation states. But at the end of the day, developing a cyber weapon is a lot different than developing a nuclear program or something like that, right? And everybody knows what a nuclear program is and how much money it takes. But developing cyber weapons and stuff like that, I gotta believe is anybody can do that. And say North Korea, who you can put all, I guess, the economic sanctions you want on them, they're gonna well, I guess they develop a nuclear program, but man, they're gonna do whatever they want. So with cyber, it seems like it's a much bigger challenge than say some kind of other deterrents we might use. One is just who's doing it really. Do we know that, or how fast can we figure out who's being a bad actor, and then what do you do to make them knock it off?
Yep, and in some cases you start talking pretty quick about, well, we've run out of options. Maybe something more kinetic is appropriate, but then you run the risk of making an escalatory and a kinetic approach, and so it's a really hard thing. And I think I fall back to my kind of original statement, which is the best ability that we have is to do good defense. If the North Korean operator has to spend still a significant amount of resources to them to develop it, much less than a nuclear bomb, but much more than just, teenager hacking. If they really want to spend resources to do something, if they believe reliably that they're going to go through all of this effort and year-long plus work, whatever, and it's not going to materialize into anything, they're going to start looking for easier other alternatives to get their message or their influence across. And I really do think that defense is undervalued. We see a lot of companies out there say, oh, I got hacked. And you're like, oh, that was a big company. But then you look at it and like, you weren't doing anything. Your program was based on compliance, not security or something like that. And so I'm not trying to make any victim feel bad. They're the victims, and they should be treated as such. But a lot of they had to be a state level to get us stuff that I see is, no, you really weren't even trying. And if we stepped it up, this would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, and I think that's where you sort of end up right now is making it a lot harder. Going a little bit back to ICS, many of the protocols that we use in ICS networks come from the internet, whether we could rattle off a whole bunch of them. In my estimation, if you had to boil down all the problems we have with the internet and how those propagated into industrial control systems, all of these systems were built on this initial idea of trust. And of course, as you know, right, there's a lot of untrustworthy people out on the internet and getting into ICS systems. So here at SEL, we've been thinking about this a lot. And if you could start all over again with a clean sheet of paper, how would you make the internet and ICS networks what I'll refer to as inherently cyber secure?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, and I think you all actually deserve a lot of credit for what you've been doing with the software-defined networks and similar. And I think there's. Let me just start off the highest level of statements and then answer your question. At the highest level, the things that we're seeing be effective for ICS adversaries, and at this time, we're tracking 13 different state adversaries that explicitly target ICS. This is not one and done, and hey, just this one time in Ukraine, but consistent cases. And when you look across the commonality of them, when you get into the ICS networks, the commonality is they're abusing native functionality, not some vulnerability they needed, not some exploit. Doesn't really matter the malware. It's the fact that if I can if I can open up the circuit breaker, I can do it as an adversary. If I can close the circuit breaker, I can do it as an adversary. And so a lot of the things we're trying to solve for are not about vulnerabilities in the system. It's just more of system security and all the components that go into it. So I will start by saying I think the OEMs get in a short order a very bad rap around, oh, this is vulnerable equipment. Well, that's not the problem. Sure, we might want to fix some of that, but that's not the ultimate issue here. And so when you think about redesigning the system, some of that inherent vulnerability is going to be there no matter what you do, because you have to be able to enable an operator to do the things that they're doing. However, you don't need all of the functionality that modern control systems can provide. I worry a lot about moving in the oil and gas industry into open, distributed control system standards, where we have a common operating platform for DCS across petrochemical facilities. Now it's this one system that can slice and dice and do X and do Y, and there's so much capability in it that the people at that petrochemical facility may never need to do X or Y functions, but it's resident in the environment for the adversary to take advantage of it. And so I think about that a lot with like substations and protection relay networks and similar, where there's functionality that your operations are not going to take advantage of. That it would be a scenario, well outside the norm for you to do certain things. And in that way, you can engineer out a lot of the attack surface from an actual engineering perspective. And then on the software and networking side, you could severely limit a lot of that attack surface. And then you have less things to look at. Then it's hey, we know we have these 3 sets of communication links with this functionality that we have to maintain for operations. Great. Now let's focus the security monitoring around that. And not to promote you guys too much for that. I mean, that's in many ways what you're doing with the software-defined networking capability is let's limit down what is allowed to communicate, how it's allowed to communicate, over what functions it's allowed to communicate. Then, yes, these things can be abused. Now let's watch for the abuse.
Yeah, that's great. Rob, it's been a great conversation, but before I let you go, I got to ask you one last question. Is this Little Bobby and your comic book, or should I call it a graphic novel? I'm not quite sure. That deals with cybersecurity. How in the heck did you come up with that idea? And how's it going?
In this podcast, any listener may have given me an iota, a mole of credibility until they were like, "Wait, you're a comic book writer?" And it's just gone. Yeah. So littlebobbycomic.com is the weekly Sunday comic I run. It started back in, I want to say 2013, 2014, when I was in the NSA and I ran the ICS threat discovery mission. I had a combatant command call me up saying, we want you to come down and present to us about this ICS stuff. We have a SCADA offense mission, and we're going to go after other people's SCADA environments, and I need you to brief us up on these targets. I was like, what the hell? Talk to my commander. So like, they're not serious, are they? We're not doing that. He's like, look, man, I don't know you, but man, you're NSA, they're a combatant command, it's kind of beholden. Like, go down and talk to them. So I prepared this multi-hour long brief that started off with a little bit of passive aggressive of like, you shouldn't be doing this. I don't fundamentally agree with this. Nobody should be in anybody else's civilian infrastructure. But if you're going to do it, here's the ways not to get people hurt, and walk through kind of target plans and profiles and how to structure it and X, Y, and Z. At the end of a multi-hour long presentation where nobody was interacting with me, at the very end, somebody raised their hand, was like, thanks, just want to say thanks for coming down and do this. And man, it's really enlightening. And just one question. What does SCADA stand for?
Oh, geez.
I was like, are you? I was so pissed. I was so pissed. And I just like blurted out, I was like, the offensive capability for the United States government, and you couldn't even be bothered to Google the term. Are you serious right now? And so I got so pissed that on the way home, I thought of this comic book, this children's book, as a sarcastic approach. And I called my buddy who was an artist, and I wrote SCADA and Me, a book for children and management. And I got it illustrated, printed on Amazon, and took it back down to the head of that shop and threw it on the table and said, next time you ever want my help, read the book first. And it's not very educational. It is about as sassy as you would think it was. What I didn't appreciate at the time was, one, they were just tasked to do this mission. They weren't jerks about it or anything. They were fine people. But what I didn't appreciate is I published it on Amazon to get the book. I basically messed up. Amazon started selling. I think it sold in short order 10,000 copies around the ICS community. And so I'd walk in places and find it on people's desks, and they loved it. And it was engineers and security people showing their kids what they did, even though it wasn't very educational. It was pictures for children. And so I ended up writing another one titled Threat Intelligence and Me, a book for children and analysts, which is actually slightly educational on it. And then I kept doing the comic on Sundays. And then because this year has just been so ridiculously bad for everybody and stressful and everything, Jeff and I got back together and we wrote "Twas the SCADA Before Christmas," classic spin, of course, on "Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Is that out
and that'll
yet?
Be publishing. It'll be publishing next month. And that one's not sassy or anything like that. It's just a kind of an ode and a thanks to our engineering and operations community for keeping the lights on, our manufactured goods and everything. And it's just little Bobby kind of exploring the world of all the things around Christmas that came from engineers and operators. And then it's something to cheer people up this holiday season.
That sounds good. I did read, you tweeted out Little Bobby over the weekend, and I saw this one was, why don't we move all the ICS stuff up into the cloud, which I think there is a place for cloud, which I think Little Bobby also said, but the control system, the actual control activity is not meant for the cloud.
Yeah, digital transformation is a buzzword in many communities, but it all means the same thing. There is value in doing cloud analytics and connectivity to be able to achieve better, safer, reliable, efficient, productive, profiting industrial control environments. And that's coming to every industry. And so you're going to have to do it at one point or another, maybe not across all your organization, but in some places it's going to be appropriate. And you got to offset the risk with security controls and compensating controls that way. But to your point, and really what the comic was about was saying, look, and I hear this all the time from the big market people and Wall Street and whatever, when they think, oh, ICS security. Nah, it's all going to be IT eventually, isn't it? It's like, nope. Yes, we have Windows environments in an industrial environment, but this stuff has applications and software and networking and physics, and that physics piece isn't going away. So sure, you'll have your cloud connectivity, but if anything's going away, it's the IT network. It's not the digital relay. And so I think that was a fun way to poke at that.
That was pretty good. Well, Rob, thanks very much for spending the afternoon with us. We could go on and on and on, but we didn't have any beer in front of us, so we'll have to wait next time we can actually be face to face when that's applicable and continue this conversation. I appreciate very much you spending some time with us today.
Likewise, thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for keeping me and my family safe, and lights and water and everything else this year. Greatly appreciated.
All righty, thanks, Rob. Talk to you later.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.